Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this evening. We are going to be talking about voices from the pandemic. We have two contributing authors with us, and Don Helin, the editor. And I'm going to turn it over to Don, so take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kathy. Well, I welcome everybody to our reading from Voices from the Pandemic tonight. We have two of our award-winning writers, Lynn Salsi and Dick Vieth, and we're just delighted that those two are here to join us. And so many of you have seen our anthology, Voices from the Pandemic. We are so proud of the fact that first, it won an honorable mention from the New England Book Festival, the New York Book Festival. Then it won at the New England Book Festival, and it got a gold medal at the Mom Choice Award. So we're delighted with what we've been able to achieve, and we think we have a really fun product for you to hear tonight. What we'd like to do is initially, I'm going to just read a short introduction, just to kind of give you a feeling when we talk about a memoir. What is a memoir? And then I'll be introducing Dick, and then I'll be introducing Lynn. And we are planning to leave time for questions and answers. So please to store up your questions. And on each of these discussions, we've had some really good discussions, and I hope we will again tonight. So first of all, what is a memoir? I think that's always an interesting question. A memoir is really a journey through the writer's past. But it is not an autobiography, which is the whole life, but it's a slice of life, some period of time that was particularly interesting to you. Maybe it was a summer you spent on your grandmother's farm, all kinds of different times. Now, what we're doing with our anthology, we're kind of highlighting that we all know the period since January 1st, 2020 makes sense to each of us because we lived through it. Our readers, on the other hand, may or may not have read through it. Therefore, you can't just tell them about it. You really have to really take them by the hand and kind of lead them through that story, helping them understand what happened so they can really experience it. And tonight you'll notice that both of our award-winning authors have been able to do that. And the way we do that is by using creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is very useful in a memoir because it helps bring the scenes alive, the setting and the dialogue. And many of the personal history memoirs succeed because the writer is able to transform just regular people into compelling, fleshed out characters. And we've tried to capture the voices from the pandemic. And as you look through the index, you'll see we have healthcare workers who were tasked over the last year terribly. Educators, just think of all the things that educators have had to do over the last year. And then we've got writers and entertainers that don't have an audience, and how are they going to do? Then we're really happy we have a special group. And this is elementary school students. And believe me, they are a lot of fun to hear, and it gives you an interesting perspective because life looks a lot different to you when you're 12 years old than when you're 50 years old. So we've really tried to get a kind of a random sample of people, and I think you'll find, and that's what's made us so successful with our anthology. And we hope you enjoy it. And now I'm going to introduce our two writers. At first, I'm going to introduce Dick Vieth. Dick has served as a parish pastor, campus pastor, and most recently as a professor of theology at Lancaster Theological Seminary. He was married to his wife, Jean, for 61 years until her recent death. He has 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. Now he's retired in Willow Valley Communities here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he is working on his memoir centered on his participation in the Selma March. And I can tell you, when Dick finishes that, that'll be something that you're really going to be interested to read. And tonight, Dick is going to read from his memoir called the Kovas 19 Memoir. Dick, take it away.
Thank you, Don. Okay.
There you go. Start again. I want to make sure everybody hears this.
The novel coronavirus emerged in Wuhan in December and rampaged through that Chinese city, leaving death and despair in its wake. The gruesomeness and deadliness of the disease sent shivers down my spine. Still, Wuhan, I rationalized, is half a world away. Chinese epidemiologists claim to have contained it, and besides, Chinese travelers can't enter the US. With the threat thus neatly tucked away in a dark corner of my brain, I entered 2020 resolved to move on beyond my wife's recent death. I began the new year by expanding my circle of friends and participating in more of the myriad activities available in Willow Valley. I registered for Tai Chi, for the Willow Valley concert series, and for Writing from the Heart, which proved so inspiring that we persuaded the teacher to extend the course for a month. I joined a nearby church attended by many Willow Valley residents. Its adult Bible class challenged my thinking, and its after-church lunch group widened my circle of friends. During January and February, I met twice as many new people as the previous decade in Willow Valley. At the same time, I continued with my Gang of Four, a weekly study discussion group. We were an unlikely mix. Jim W., a pastor, Roger, an advertising consultant, Jim H., a counselor, and myself, a theologian. We had grown close, able to share anything. I awoke early every morning, eager to tackle my whirlwind of activities. Then suddenly COVID-19 erased every one of those joys. The virus spread silently westward from Wuhan, girdling the globe in 2 short months and leaping the Atlantic. Terrifying stories emerged from New York City's hospitals. America was totally unprepared. Insufficient beds, ventilators, masks, gowns, gloves, and swabs. With Washington's ineptitude, every state, county, and city was on its own. Soon, COVID-19 struck Lancaster. 2/3 of the county's fatalities came from nursing homes or retirement communities like mine at Willow Valley. Suddenly, I had become a prime target. Like most Americans, I didn't like using the word evil. But how could you call a pandemic infecting 13 million people worldwide and killing 500,000 anything less than evil? Did others feel the same way, I wondered? I called my next door neighbor. Do you use the word evil? I asked. Only when talking about you, she replied. Ignoring the dig, I continued, is novel coronavirus evil? Absolutely, she said. What about systemic racism? Demonstrations protesting George Floyd's murder were raging in the streets. Is racism evil? Definitely. When Willow Valley residents were advised to pair off and check on each other daily, she agreed to be my partner. We would telephone each other every morning. What will you do if I don't answer? I asked. Call security and tell them to bring a body bag, she quipped. In late March, Willow Valley issued its protocols for dealing with the pandemic. No visitors from outside, and any resident who traveled outside the county had to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. That canceled our family Easter celebration in Baltimore. Further restrictions followed. Stay in place, no visiting, frequent hand washing, safe distancing, masks in public places. What a downer. We felt like prisoners locked in our cells. Our immediate problems now became loneliness and boredom. Cabin fever began to set in. Soon Willow Valley launched its answer to boredom, a series of TV lectures, concerts, and special programs. I especially enjoyed the lectures on Da Vinci, Degas, and Cézanne, on the canals of Venice and the Panama Canal, on the pharaohs, the Medici, and the Tsars. There were so many good programs available that you couldn't possibly keep up with all of them. Another antidote to loneliness was Zoom. With Zoom, our gang of four began meeting virtually. Conversations once again carried back and forth among us. We dissected readings and wrestled with current events, but our priority was sharing each other's joys and sorrows. During one session, Jim H. noted that in COVID-19 wards, people either die alone or die holding the hand of a stranger, a masked caretaker, comforting them as they slip away. Would you rather die alone, I asked Roger, or with your wife present? I'd want Beverly there holding my hand, Roger answered. But if you go first, then she'll have to die alone. True, maybe if I'm there for her when she goes, I'd have the courage to face dying alone. Zoom also brought back writing from the heart. Laughter and occasionally tears filled the screen as we recovered meaningful memories. And Zoom allowed my clan to gather virtually. My two oldest grandsons displayed the product of their labors in quarantine, painting the house interior with their father, something they'll never forget. My other two grandkids showed off Ovi, their Labrador retriever rescued from a lab shelter. Ovi bounced around the screen, licking faces. Even before all this took place, creative juices, well, there might be joys too, began flowing in my cul-de-sac, which consists of 11 houses surrounding a circular road. Let's gather outside every Saturday at 5, one of our residents suggested. Put on your mask, set your chairs 6 feet apart in a circle, BYOB, and we'll have a party. The first Saturday was so much fun, we stayed until descending darkness drove us back into our isolation booths. The following Saturday, a resident from the next cul-de-sac sneaked in. I heard your laughter last week and had to crash the party. In June, we planned a surprise for a resident whose name connected her to a Roman summer solstice festival. Ideas sparked from person to person as the festival took shape. An eternal flame was central to the ancient festival, so I asked the administration's permission to have a small charcoal fire. Absolutely not, the administrator declared. Well then, how about tiki torches? That took her by surprise. I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no. Permission granted. Everything came off beautifully. The astonished roastie said she hadn't had so much fun for months. Independence Day fell on a Saturday a few weeks later. I suggested we plan our own 4th of July. The response was lukewarm. Who'll volunteer to take charge, I asked. It's your idea, so you do it, came the unanimous response. I did have an idea. COVID-19 had exposed America's institutional racism, and George Floyd's murder rubbed it raw. White America was waking up to 4 centuries of Black oppression. This year's celebration, I proposed, should highlight the dark underside of American history. We opened with a recording of Stars and Stripes Forever and readings from the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address. A resident then read Caroline Randall Williams' stunning op-ed from the New York Times, "My Body is a Confederate Monument." And another read Billie Holiday's theme song, "Strange Fruit," composed by Abel Meeropol, followed by Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." We concluded by singing the Black National Anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." Or rather, I sang it because no one else knew it. The next morning, we were surprised to find a feature essay on Lift Every Voice prominently displayed on the front page of the Sunday Lancaster paper. I immediately emailed my thanks to the author, Jeff Hawks, attaching a copy of our program. He replied, "I think your Independence Day program was spot on, stirring, meaningful, and thought-provoking." During one of our family Zoom meetings, my son remarked, "Because of the lockdown, our family has done more things together, and we've grown closer." I, too, have found such unanticipated side effects. Indeed, my experience of our 6-month lockdown has been as much positive as negative. Largely, I suppose, because the virus hasn't touched me personally. That is, until a recent Zoom meeting of the Gang of Four. 3 of us appeared on the screen, but not Roger. A phone call revealed that he was in the ICU with severe anemia. Tests also disclosed that he had something more scary, a positive reading for the novel coronavirus. That took the air out of my lungs. Suddenly, the virus was blowing its hot breath on our faces. Did you have any symptoms? I asked Roger. No, it was a complete surprise. What caused it? I haven't a clue, he said. We've been so cautious we haven't even gone shopping. Groceries and meds are delivered outside our door. How capricious this pandemic is, I thought, sneaking in where we least expect it. The following week, Roger appeared on screen looking strong as ever. Still no symptoms, he said. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, but saved celebration until the conclusion of his 14-day quarantine. Even then, any celebration will be muted by the upturn in new cases in our county, state, and nation. Dr. Fauci says the spike is not the second wave, just the end of the beginning of the first wave. We have a long way to go.
Well, thank you much, Dick, on that, what I think is a fairly somber note, which is probably well due. We'll go ahead and end yours, and we're going to move to my longtime friend, Lynn Salsi, who's been talking about working in the weeds. Lynn is an award-winning Pulitzer Prize nominated author for Appalachian Jack Tillis series and the author of 29 books. She is a university professor and resides in the Greensboro, North Carolina area. Also, Lynn is a Zoom in the Book author. So we turn it over to you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess my experience is a little bit different because I was sitting in the classroom when I realized that we would probably go off onto online, which of course we all call Zoom right now. And as a matter of fact, I had gotten a hint the day before Georgia went on the coronavirus lockdown, because we also have a son in North Carolina, and I keep up with the news in North Carolina because we've lived in North Carolina. And the governor of North Carolina called an emergency the day before. And so I'm driving to class and I heard this on the news. I walked in and said to the students, don't be surprised if Georgia goes very quickly. And they looked at me like I was a zombie, like I had secret powers. How would you know? And I said, because don't be silly. The state of North Carolina just went into a lockdown, so Georgia cannot be far behind. So that sort of sets up the entire essay. So it was no surprise that university classes moved online. I heard it on the radio traffic station on March the 11th as I drove home from class. The governor of Georgia will hold a press conference to discuss the pandemic. The next day at 4:45 p.m., the campus closed and students evacuated dormitories. Classes resumed online 6 days later. It seems like half a lifetime has passed with interruptions of familiar aspects of my life, not seeing my students, no drives to campus, no friends to greet at church, and cancellation of all my book events. My days took on a foreign routine. Rules to shelter in place created the disruption, not because our family of 3 wanted to be alone together, but because rules were imposed on all of our lives. What happened to our free country? And would all the old folks die? Our little dog Ossie's morning constitutional became a ritual for me. Mornings in my bathrobe offered a few minutes of reflection before going online to Zoom with students. As I walked through the backyard looking at daffodils in bloom, I thought how I might turn the place into a bona fide garden with a pebble path, like the ones on YouTube. 2 ancient gardenias were covered with hundreds of buds. It seemed like a promise, but I crossed my fingers hoping that frost was over. Ossie ran through emerging coneflowers and daisies planted 10 years ago, stopping to sniff the scent of baby rabbits and their mother that lived in the overgrowth at the back fence. I looked for gerberas in places where I had planted for 2 decades. They often freeze during the cold months, with their reappearance depending on nature rather than nurture. This can become a cutting garden, I mused, knowing I'd planned that since my children left home 9 years ago. I was vigilant about emerging gerberas and began weeding only after seeing tiny sharp leaves break through the earth. To weed too early causes baby plants to be mistaken for weeds. I marked possible plants and pulled only identifiable weeds. After that, I counted 20 returns. My mother might have said they are harbingers of spring. Mid-March to early May meant hours online and texting with students ages 19 and 20 who had never studied online. I had coffee and Ossie's outing before answering 40 to 50 texts and dealing with writing due late March that took some students until early April to submit. Students booted from dorms and predictable lives moved home or isolated in apartments. They missed freedom, friends, and questioned the government intrusion. But none seemed depressed. Most were frustrated with rules that dictated their new, unpredictable life. Many parents depended on their college children to help younger siblings with online lessons. One student took care of his 10-year-old brother and his great-grandmother suffering from Alzheimer's. Many with part-time jobs moved to full-time. Some at Chick-fil-A shared photos in real time of 2 lines of cars encircling the building. "This is a madhouse," Kent texted me. "Everyone wants chicken. Look at this photograph." And he texted me the photograph. At this rate, I'll be able to pay tuition for my next 2 semesters. By the way, I'm begging and pleading for an extension for the paper that is due tomorrow. One student's dad died, and the student became the breadwinner for the family. He only had 2 weeks to find a less expensive apartment for his mother and younger sister. B, who could only afford 2 courses a semester, gave up a fry cook job to chase her nursing dreams. She earned a CMA last December and worked in a senior care home. She texted, "Professor, I saw a patient die. I feel numb, but I work again in an hour. How can I possibly finish my writing class? Help me." I had a few advantage students, the ones with the credit cards, the latest mobile phone, and a cool car. Jenna texted an invitation to me to come to Acapulco. She found a super cheap plane ticket, a 5-star room for a 1-star price, and her classroom became a beach in Mexico. Regardless, 152 students kept streaming personal issues more than questions about assignments. None were meant to be humorous, but it went something like this. "I didn't sign up for this. Whoever thinks online education is good is crazy. I'm applying for a refund. Can you spot me an extra 20 points on that paper? I deserve an A for putting up with this crap. I need a human. I'm too busy to study. I'm in home prison. My dad's a plumber and I'm his new assistant. I have to go to work and can't be late." My backyard became my refuge. It substituted for lunch on campus, off campus, tea parties with 2 grandchildren, and laughs with students who hung around after classes. But that bastion of sanctity turned into a week of flooding April rain that brought weeds, fast growing, thick, pernicious, along with a total quarantine inside. When the sun reappeared, my husband offered a short-term rescue and help weed, but it's not his thing. I wondered if he thought it was my thing. With 2 weeks left in the semester, I had 1,500 final exam essay pages to read and grade. My backyard time became limited. Not wanting to lose momentum, I checked neighborhood online posts to see if any handy kids wanted to earn money. 16-year-olds were asking $12 to $15 an hour. Weed tending immediately became my thing as I finished reading digital papers under the large red umbrella. Forced garden care gave me breaks that refreshed my mind after 50 pages or so. Late papers added to final grading drudgery the 4th week in April. I mustered patience and headed toward the finish line of averaging grades. By then, there were rewards some mornings as I returned inside with handfuls of flowers. Daily relaxation came in the dirt beds where I realized I was thinking my own thoughts. With no one to interfere, I freshened my brain for the last few papers I had to grade. As I saw my garden come to life, I thought about my dad. He had a green thumb, an amazing one. I thought how in childhood I followed him down camellia line paths in February and up early March. Camellias were his pride. Neighbors came on Sunday afternoons to admire the blooms, the same ones that won him prizes at the annual camellia show. The day before guest arrivals, he paid 10-year-old me a quarter to pick up dead blossoms on the ground. He was no pushover. I had to gather more than 50 to be paid. As I mulched, I wish I'd learned everything my dad had wanted to teach me. Re-entering the house took me back to questions, stressing students, reading assignments and texts, but I was released from the misery when I posted semester grades. Finally, I sat and stared at the yard, assessing. 30 years in one house meant 30 years digging the same dirt. The impatiens I planted under the shade tree near the kitchen window formed magnificent pink mounds for 15 years before the tree died, along with the one next to the garage where my 2 youngest sons played on a brightly colored swing set. It was orange, yellow, and red. A former neighbor, a real curmudgeon, my mother called him a killjoy, told my husband to get rid of the plastic. He declared it tacky. He hated seeing it from his 2nd-story bedroom window. Back then, I stifled the urge to add something more obnoxious to my backyard. By mid-May, flower beds bloomed, tomatoes and peppers grew tall, bees and butterflies swarmed salvia and buddleia. Photos of beautiful daylilies were sent to my cousin, who gave me the plant. After 5 weeks, blooming stopped and will not resume until next summer. The rabbits moved on to the park for better food, but a deer showed up in our front yard and ate all of the lilies I had planted. "You've taken on a lot," a neighbor said last week as I observed the missing plants and the remains of our old lamppost that was bombed by bored teenagers who invaded our yard on the 4th of July. "It's like the tomato that ate Cleveland," my neighbor said, and she helped me pick up M80 wrappers off the driveway. "How will you keep your complicated new landscape up?" That conversation came before my husband put up another umbrella to keep me out of the sun during near daily weeding because it gets hot here after 9 a.m. Then last night, I thought the weeding might take on another 2 summers, and still there was no pebble walkway. It had looked easy in the 8-minute video. I had a fleeting thought that concrete covering the yard might have been a better idea.
I think she has frozen and lost her video. So
Okay,
let's go ahead and talk with Dick. And
Sure. Dick, can you unmute your mic? Yeah. Hopefully we'll be able to get Lynn back, because I think based on her memoir, she's got a lot of interesting things to tell us, and hopefully she'll be able to get back. But Dick, we ought to lead a discussion. We always like to kind of ask the question, how have things changed since you finished your memoir? Are they still the same, or have you seen major changes?
Things have been more the same than changed between July 1, which was when the memoir ended, and January 1. We did have to change our plans for our cul-de-sac meeting, because come September, we were meeting in the dark. So we moved back to 4 o'clock, but that only lasted for about 2 weeks, by which time it was so cold, nobody wanted to stay outdoors anymore. So we debated what to do about that. And finally, we decided to go on Zoom. And that's worked out very well. We often will have a subject like everybody is to bring a joke or to bring an unusual word that we can guess what it means. Or we even had a scavenger hunt that someone invented. I had hoped that by Thanksgiving, things would have settled down, and we were going to have Thanksgiving dinner together in Baltimore, to be followed by Christmas dinner the same way. But actually, they got worse as the fall went on. So we had to cancel those plans. We did get together at Mick's Bar and Grill, which had a deck. So we met on the deck, which we thought was relatively safe. But otherwise, we've been pretty much holed up, and I'll tell you the truth, it's beginning to get a little tiring. However, with the coming of the vaccines, there's been a whole new excitement, and almost everybody here at Willow Valley has gotten at least one shot. I have had one shot, and I'll get my second in 2 weeks. So we're looking at a hopeful summer where we'll be opened up again and able to do more things.
I'll tell you, Dick, one of the things that I noted, I think it was really kind of crazy up here in the up north, because in the month of January wasn't too bad, but February was cold, rainy, snowy.
Yeah.
And you know, during the fall, it wasn't so bad, because you could get outside, you could do things on the porch and stuff like that. But boy, since that winter turned against us, it's been tough. Lynn, welcome back. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, it just sent me in circles.
Okay, we just finished talking with Dick, and one of the questions that I always like to ask, I think it brings up some terrific discussion, is how have you noticed that things have changed since you finished your memoir?
Well, actually, my life doesn't change very much, because I guess I lead a pretty boring life. I'm used to, the main thing that's changed is that I don't get to go and talk about books as much. I'm missing a lot about live classes, because in the last several years, all of my classes have been live. I am Zoom a lot, and I feel like now my face has been on Zoom enough. I need to be back in that classroom, but otherwise we stay busy. It was sort of interesting reading that essay that I just pulled through. We planted in the fall, because of it was pretty boring just not being able to see your friends and go to church and do all the things we did. So I ordered 200 bulbs.
Wow.
And I planted 150 daffodils in my backyard to brighten it up. And my son felt sorry for me, and he came out and helped me plant the last 50. And then I think my daughter-in-law said, I've got bulbs left over. I said, I'll take them. And so my husband helped me plant another 35. So the interesting thing is every single day I go out to see what bulbs are up because we've had awful rain. I know some of you guys have had a lot of rain too. Not so much in the last week, but we had about 6 weeks of rain all the time. And I thought, well, the bulbs are probably going to rot in the ground. So I'm still doing teaching, and I'm still teaching writing. And, you know, maybe I'll lead a boring life. I've had my vaccines, and we run up and down the road a great deal seeing our children. And we can do that a little bit easier now than we could 6 months ago. But, you know, living in the South, it gets warm here sooner, and people are dying to get out in the yard. So as soon as it's warm, everybody's out in the yard here. And we have a big neighborhood, and people walk a lot in the neighborhood, and there's a park across from where we live. So people here don't have any problem staying distanced, because I had to leave Atlanta because I teach in Atlanta. And so I'm in Atlanta a lot during the week when I teach, and then we come back to North Carolina for summers and all of our holidays and breaks. So I'm on break right now. So I'm in North Carolina again. And we didn't have too much of a lockdown here. And I guess the state was lucky. We did not have the same problems that, you know, New York had, for instance, for goodness sake. But we don't have that. The density of population's not that great. Like, you can go to the grocery store here and there may only be 15 people in a whole big grocery store. Mm-hmm. So that's nothing like in Atlanta. If I go to the grocery store in Atlanta, there are 150 people in a grocery store. So it's just a different scene. But yeah, I'm glad it's coming to an end.
I'm pleased to report that Elaine and I were up in the garden, and the daffodil are starting to come up a little bit. So one of the things I've heard educators talk about is the impact on students of virtual versus not being able to be in the classroom. Some are discouraged, some have some problems with loneliness. Have you noticed that among your students?
Well, see, that's another thing. I read about it the same as you do. But for instance, I have a grandchild that's in high school in South Carolina, and they haven't closed schools. They haven't missed a beat. I think maybe when school was off last March, that they were home for a couple of weeks, and then they were back 2 and 3 days a week. And then they started this fall, and they were there every other day. And then they suddenly went back full time. And so it depends on where you live. For instance, in Georgia, if you live in a small town, you didn't have any problems with schools. And if you lived in Midtown Atlanta, then that's another issue altogether. But I teach university students, and the big thing with them is they have this feeling that they don't have to be responsible. I noticed that this year, less of them are acting adult, like I'm doing this, and I'm going to make some decisions, and I'm coming to class, and I'm not going to have any excuses about homework. And so the big thing with university students is that I'm seeing a certain, probably 25% of my students, where it used to be 10% of my students, act like they don't understand assignments. They don't want to come to class. When they come to class, they're 15 minutes late. And it's almost like, but who knows what that is? Because I have students that'll say, my mother told me not to go to class today. I mean, that's kind of, my mother said I had the hiccups, so don't go to class today. Or my cat died and I can't go to class. You see all kinds of things.
I imagine you hear them all then.
Well, students, it's like I tell people, one day my husband picked me up for lunch. This goes back before coronavirus, and we had a major paper that was 25% of a final grade. And so my text lit up as we were having lunch, and 3 grandparents died, 2 cats and 2 dogs died, all within an hour of the series of classes that I was going to take. So you just have to take it with a sense of humor, and because some people are right on the money. They've had really good training. They're out there. They've kept up with all assignments. So some kids just have to find their way. I'm just finding that a greater percentage of university students who are freshmen and sophomores that I'm teaching now have to find their way, and they will.
Let me go back to Dick again. Dick, how about your interaction with your family? And you mentioned grandchildren, and have you been able to keep up with them, and how are they doing?
Well, they're, as far as I can tell, doing fine. Two of our grandkids are at Temple University, and they see each other a lot, of course, there, and they seem to be enjoying their classwork. I'm not sure how much in person their classwork is. I'll have to ask them next time we meet.
Sure.
And my granddaughter, Maddie, is a sophomore at the University of Michigan. And she had a bad problem because she has 3 roommates in a 5-room suite. And one of them got the COVID virus, which meant that all of them were kind of locked down. But I think she's enjoying it pretty much. She wishes most of her classes are virtual, and she wishes that more of them could be in person.
I also noticed that you've been a parish priest or pastor for a long time. What do you think the impact of what we've had to go through has been on congregations, and how they've been able to get together, and how all that's worked, and how hard has that been on the pastors to try to keep things together and keep things going?
I think it's been very hard. It may have a payoff in time, though, because, of course, you have to innovate. Pastors are doing things, the congregations are doing things that they've never done before. And some of them are successful and some not so successful. And I think they're all working harder, because many pastors will really have 2 services. One will be in the church where only a limited number can go because of having to spread out. And the other one is virtual. So to put together two services, which really are quite different in their character, I think it's a hard job.
Well, it sure sounds like it. I'll tell you, let me turn it back to Kathy and see if maybe we have some questions from Facebook.
Hi, this has been very interesting. I think the before and after is always interesting to the audience. We had a question for each of you. If you could briefly tell us, do you have a future project that you're working on? It's different being part of an anthology. Lynn, I know you have individual books. Dick, I think you're working on something. So could you share that with the audience briefly, please?
Sure, I'm happy to say I'm about 98% completed with 2 projects. Unfortunately, I felt like I needed to do them back and forth. And so one of them is a collection for younger kids about early folklore and introducing students to folklore. And it introduces students who are perhaps, say, 5, 6, and 7 years of age, mostly, I guess, targeted for the 7-year-olds that can read part of it. But it's a parental thing with participating with the child, and or an older child can participate with a younger sibling. And it's a collection of 20 stories, and it's a fairly elaborate telling of the 20 stories with some illustrations. And then it has questions for kids to think about, because one of the things that I've found even in college students is they do not totally comprehend meanings within the text that they are reading, and they need to learn to read it more closely. So I'm hoping that by starting doing some reading intervention when the students are 6, 7, and 8 years old, and having things to discuss with them. So it's kind of an educational but fun type of book. I had the idea because of all the Zooming and teachers having to teach from a Zoom to younger children, even kindergartners learning on Zoom. And so this way, this book is topical because about 40 of our states have the learning, the same learning test and that sort of thing. And for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, they learn about a lot about folklore, fairy tales, tall tales, and all that. And then the second thing is a revision of the Jack Tale book with a lot more explanation into what the Jack Tales are. So hopefully those are my next 2 projects. And I'm looking at a finish line. And since I'm on break, I'm hoping that finish line is going to come within about 4 days.
Good. Well, hang in there. That sounds exciting. Dick, how about you?
Well, of course, you already mentioned that I'm working on this memoir that focuses on the Selma March. And I'm really fighting for time to write. It's when we live here in our late years, like I do, it takes most of our time just to keep alive. So getting time to write takes some prioritizing. But I really enjoy writing, so that's what's keeping me alive, actually. Now, a lesser project is my deck garden. Lynn put me in mind of this. I have a wooden deck. It's off the 2nd floor. It's about 15 feet by 15 feet with a fence and a rail on. So I have bought a series of flower boxes and put them on the rail, but mostly I grow vegetables. And last year, I didn't mention this in the COVID memoir, but I raised more cherry tomatoes than I could get rid of in the neighborhood. And the same with lettuce and spinach. And that's been kind of fun. But I'll tell you a problem. I looked out the window while we were starting, when it was still light, and there was a squirrel in my spinach bed, digging and digging, looking for walnuts. So those are my 2 projects.
Well, it sounds like you're both managing to stay busy. And I think that this is one thing about being a writer. You know, a lockdown is a challenge, but not quite as much of a challenge when you have writing to do. Oftentimes, you know, I find myself almost on lockdown off and on because, you know, we have writing. I know I was really pleased that I finished my 7th thriller, and it came out this past fall. And it's a good political thriller, came out right about the presidential election. And it was a story of a third-party candidate that uses artificial intelligence to cook the books and try to steal the election. People didn't know if this was a little fortune teller or what. And then we've had so much fun with the Voices from the Pandemic anthology, which we've been doing. And there's been discussion, are we going to do something else? I don't know. And the other thing I've started working on, I threatened I would never do that. And then I've tried, and we'll see where it goes, but I'm writing a memoir. And I'm not sure if anybody in their right mind would ever read it, but we'll see what happens. So fortunately, all those things seem to be keeping me busy. And I hope that answers the questions, Kathy.
That's great. You have answered all the questions, and we're at the end of our time. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and good luck with your future projects, and hope to see you all again soon on Zoom. And I want to thank everyone on Facebook for joining us. This video, along with our other Zoom into Books presentations, will be available on the Zoom into Books YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So you can subscribe to that if you like. It's free, and you can watch all the videos at your leisure. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Don.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Richard.